Welcome everyone to Cornell Keynotes. Joining us here in Studio A is Andrew Quagliata, who is Senior Lecturer at the S.C. Johnson College of Business here at Cornell University. Andrew is the faculty author of an online course relevant to what we're going to be covering today here at Cornell called Building Compelling Slide Decks and Reports, and is also faculty author of several communication-related certificate programs also offered here at Cornell University. So heads up for a number of resources that are going to appear in the chat throughout today's conversation. Just 2 days ago, Andrew's new book, Build Better Slide Decks, Create Sharper Slides, Stronger Stories, and Standout Presentations was just released. We'll share the URL for that as well. Andrew, this is your third or fourth time on the show. I think we're at number 4 here. Yeah. And as always, we're pleased to have you back. Congratulations on the book publishing. I know that it can be a daunting process, certainly as you near the finish line. Yeah. What was that like?
Yeah, well, my goal for 2025 was to write a book. Started really compiling resources, writing in January, 2-3 hours a day for about 5 months, and it was a long process. The process, even after finishing writing till today, has felt longer than the process of writing, but it really feels great to be here today and see it up on Amazon and where people are getting to buy it.
Very cool. Thank you so much. So what should we talk about?
I think we should talk about slide decks.
Let's hit slide decks.
Yeah.
You've spent a lot of your career, the bulk of your career, teaching communication at Cornell University. What made you want to write a book about creating slide decks?
Yeah. Well, Chris, I imagine like you and a lot of people watching today, we've all sat through so many bad presentations. Yep. And if we're being honest, maybe we've created a few bad slides ourselves. I know I have. And what I realized is most people don't really get really good training on how to do this. My students are the main inspiration for this book. They, they go intern and they come back to campus and I say, how's your internship? And they'll say, oh, wow, my manager really liked my ability to create clear slide decks. And so much so that some of my former students report that they wouldn't let anything be seen by a client until the intern got to look at it first. And I thought that's kind of funny, but also a compliment to them. And then the other thing that started to happen over the years is I've had students who've graduated and the next semester or even 2-3 years later, they'll reach out and say, hey, can you share some of those course pack with me, those course resources? We really need them at our company. And I thought, wow, they're really not really packaged for that. And it made me think, well, how could I package them so that not just my former students, but everybody could get access to them?
So when you say slide deck, what do you mean? For many in our audience, that term is not familiar to them. It wasn't to me at one point. Sure. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's just a series of individual presentation slides. I'll put in the deck might just be the file. So someone might say, send me the deck. What they're really saying is send me the file. And the file could be a PowerPoint presentation file. It could also be any software there where you could make slides, be that Canva, Keynote, Google Slides, or others.
So there are many ways to communicate within a business and an organization. When does a slide deck fit the bill versus, let's say, like an email or a memo, which are quickly becoming things of the past? Yeah. When do you use a slide deck and why?
Yeah, so you use a slide deck when you want to communicate something that's highly visual. And there's certainly a time and place for email, and more and more we're seeing maybe less memos because we are becoming a highly visual culture, which makes sense why this trend of slide decks has become increasingly more popular in the last 10, 20 years. What I encourage people to do, though, is think about the purpose for their communication. What do they hope to accomplish, and which tool can help them accomplish that goal? So sometimes an email will do the job. Sometimes it still is a memo. And oftentimes what we're seeing more and more, it might be a slide deck.
So you see slide decks turn up in all kinds of workplaces, just like you mentioned, and organizations. How are they showing up today? What's the state of the art and science of slide deck making?
Yeah, well, we're seeing that their traditional reports maybe not being produced as much, more and more slide decks. We're seeing that they're being used at the front line of the organization all the way to executives in a boardroom. But we also know people still surprisingly aren't getting the training they need on how to communicate these effectively. So sometimes slide decks really get a bad rap. And the thing is the slide deck, the tool's not the problem. The problem is, how are we using the tool? So what I thought I'd do is show you a couple visuals that I prepared for my book so we can get a sense of maybe how they're being used right now.
Let's take a look.
Let's take a look. All right, so the first one we see here is a very simple slide that might be used to support a live presentation. We see what I would call a headline at the top and some visual support. The next example might be a nice example. You'll notice, by the way, that all the content's the same, the points are the same, the visuals are the same. We're just adding text, more text as we go throughout. This one might be nice to facilitate a discussion or a conversation. So it's something that we might print out and actually have a deck in front of us and flip through, or maybe we're in a smaller meeting room where it's up on a TV screen. And then the third way that they're being used, and this is newer to maybe a lot of folks, is they're actually being used to write a report. And this is what I talk about in my Building Compelling Slide Decks and Report class for Cornell, is we're not using Microsoft Word when we're creating something that's highly visual. And in this example, we still see that there's a data display, but there's a lot of textual support. The idea behind this third example is that it needs to stand alone. It's something that the audience would read. In an ideal world, this wouldn't be something that we present.
Great. Just a little aside here. I mean, what we're not getting into is what colors to choose,
right.
Animations to kind of go with.
Yeah.
We're talking about knowledge transfer,
Yeah.
and I think that's really, really critical to the conversation that we're having here.
Yeah, I appreciate that point because I don't actually teach people how to use PowerPoint so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I could, but I think there's plenty of other resources that can do that. I teach people how to communicate using the tool.
Yes.
And I think there's a difference. Now, in the book, I do talk about color and layout and design principles, but we start by figuring out, is this the right tool? What do we want to have the tool accomplish? And then we get to more fundamental communication principles that should guide us in our decision-making about how to make more effective slides.
Anytime there's slides anticipated, I'm going to bring a deck to this meeting.
Yeah.
Somebody always asks, how many do you have?
Yeah.
Is there an optimal number of slides?
You know, I got asked that in class, I think on Thursday, and the answer is no.
Right.
There's not an optimal number. I think people want a simple rule. Okay, I give a 10-minute presentation, I should have 10 slides. That's 1 slide per minute. There's no magic number, so don't do that.
Okay.
What we want to figure out for ourselves is what approach fits our style. I've once saw someone deliver like 60 slides in 30 minutes, and it's a lot of slides, but do a really good job at it, where most people probably wouldn't be able to pull that off. So do we feel more comfortable if we have more slides, more changes, as long as we're not overwhelming our audience? Or do we feel more comfortable if we just have 1 or 2 or 3, just a few slides just to be there to facilitate a conversation? We want to really go with what's best for us. The problem is a lot of us get put in situations where we end up we make poor choices. So one that I see a lot, and it's happened to me, I'm going to go give a talk and they tell me how many slides I should have. And I think, well, that's really prescriptive and limiting. Or I see situations where people get told you only can make 1 slide and it's part of a broader presentation. So let's run through a hypothetical. Imagine that you're the chief sustainability officer of a publicly traded company, and I'm the CEO, and I'm about to give a report to our investors. And I say, Chris, I need you to make 1 slide to put in my deck on sustainability. And you think to yourself, like, my whole team's job is this, and I'm supposed to encapsulate that in 1 slide. That puts you in a kind of a tough spot, right?
It sure does.
Yeah. And by the way, I have a theory. If you actually go look at the sustainability slide in most publicly traded companies' decks, you'll see the problem is they're just overloaded with information. So we end up making the choice of more is better, and more isn't always better. More sometimes can be really overwhelming, and it's one of the reasons, again, that people often complain about this type slide decks as a form of communication. They say, oh, it's terrible. It's terrible because some of the choices that we're making.
Yeah. Back to goals and objectives. You know, some people think that a really polished, really slick, tight-looking deck is the objective. No, that's not the case?
No. Well, beautiful decks are nice.
Sure.
We all would like it to look good. But if you have a deck that looks really good, but it doesn't add any value, I feel like blunt, you're wasting people's time. So how do we make a deck that adds value, but also happens to look good? The worst compliment would be if someone came up to you after your presentation and they said to you, Chris, your slides were just beautiful. You might think, well, why would that be such a terrible thing? Well, the better thing that you'd rather have people say to you after a presentation is, wow, your ideas were so clear. Your insights were wonderful. Your conclusions were spot on, and your recommendations were excellent. And then what allowed that to happen is the design of the slide didn't get in the way of the communication. The design facilitated your insights, recommendations, and conclusions.
Yeah, point taken. In your book, you talk about a few times about some common myths about slide decks, misperceptions we have about them. What would be some?
Yeah, let's start with one of my favorites, and it's often, I think, when people show up to my workshops and classes, they think, okay, now decks take me a long time to make. And so they think I'm going to make them so much faster. And the reality is many people think experts make slides quickly, but in reality, really good decks and slides take time to produce. Just like an expert in anything, we tend to look at their work at the end product and say, oh, well, they just must be naturally gifted, or that's a skill that they have, and I don't have it. And the reality is we all can learn it, and we all can get more efficient at making slides, but it's unlikely that we're magically going to start doing these really, really fast. From experience, like you said at the start, I've been doing this for 20 years. I make a lot of slides. I give a lot of workshops, teach a lot of classes. And while I'm more efficient than I used to be, I still don't necessarily do it quickly because I think really clear communication takes time to produce.
Yeah, you write about something called, in your book, information density. Mm-hmm. I think I know what it means, but can you explain further?
Yeah.
What is there an optimal density of information for slides?
Yeah, this is one of the key contributions I think I make in the book to the field of communication of information density. I've done a number of studies of publicly traded companies' decks with some of my students, and we've come to measure it in two ways. There's lots of ways to measure information density, but it's essentially the amount of content that you have on a slide. It's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. One of the ways we measure that is in word count. How many words might be appropriate for different levels of density. And we also look at the number of elements, or what we call chunks on a slide. And generally, we have a limited cognitive capacity as humans. We can only take in so much information at once, and slides seem to continuously test the limits of our cognitive capacity. So we've got to adjust the density of the slide for the situation that we're in.
So you have some examples for us.
I do, yeah.
Right, let's look at this.
Yeah, so we'll go back to the three slides we looked at earlier. And the first slide is a low density slide. We see a headline and one chunk of information being the chart. The next slide is an example of what I'd call a medium density slide. We again see a chart that doesn't take up the full screen, just half, and then a block of text. The third example, this would be an example of a high density slide where we see 4 chunks of information, one of them being a chart, 3 chunks of text. This again would be an example of one that someone might not present, but be emailed to someone, perhaps as an attachment that would be read. I'm going to share with you 2 more examples that I didn't share with you at the start, only because for a while I would go and give workshops and I'd ask people, which of the 3 looks most like the one made in your organization? And I want you all at home to be thinking about that as well. And inevitably, people would look at this one, the most dense one, and say, do you have another one that's more dense, like farther? So I made 2 more examples. We've got this version that seems more dense. It actually is a bit more words, 258 words on the slide.
Paragraph form.
Paragraph, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't make you very excited to read it even if it's not being projected during your presentation. This still is pretty dense. And then one more, even bigger, longer paragraphs and just some random icons thrown in here. The challenge is here, once we start going above 250 words on a slide, we either should be thinking about maybe this should be a report, or maybe we need to break this one slide into multiple slides to reduce the density.
You know, sometimes a deck has to do double, or triple duty. It not only is a presentation tool, right, or it's to some degree the presentation itself, but it also has to act as a standalone thing, like you said, a report that has to be delivered.
Yeah.
Or the person that missed your presentation needs to catch up on what you've just presented on.
Yes.
Talk about multiple ways that we think about decks, because we don't always do that.
Yeah. You're really getting at the heart of one of the toughest challenges is when we try to create one deck that has to do multiple things well. So we create a deck that's there to support us during a presentation. And notice I didn't say that like we give a PowerPoint presentation, right? We shouldn't give PowerPoint presentation. We should give a presentation and have the slides there to support us. And by the way, if the power fails or the projector goes out, we still can give the presentation. So that's the heart of like what a live presentation should do. But if we try to design slides that then also need to make sense to someone to read before we meet or as a standalone after, an effective low density slide doesn't have enough information for someone to make sense of later. And then the flip side is if we try to make a slide that people are going to understand later, but we also have to present live, people will either read it, they will not read it and then listen to us, or check out. In fact, I was chatting with you earlier, telling you I did this survey this morning with a workshop group, and I gave them that option. If you have a slide that is got way too much information on, what do you do? And I want you all thinking at home about what you might do. Too much text on a slide. Do you read it and not listen to the presenter? Do you listen and not read it? Or do you check out altogether? And I'd never done this poll this way before, but it's too bad we don't have a poll today for the audience. But 33% of the people listening this morning said they would just check out altogether. So this is, again, the danger of trying to create a slide that does too many things. So the long story short, Chris, is this. If you have to, in an ideal world, we'd make two different decks. But we don't have infinite time. So the reality is when I'm coaching people to create a deck that needs to be used in two different situations, we create a medium density slide deck. And that's usually a slide deck that has between 50 and 100 words on it. But it's very strategic in using in the way that it communicates so that it doesn't overwhelm a live audience, but it has enough information that can make sense to someone when you're not there.
I have a process question from Hari who asks, do you suggest drafting content as text, for example, in a Google Doc, prior to creating slides, or are there benefits to just drafting the content directly in the slide deck?
Yeah.
You hear what Hari's getting at?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. My best practice advice is to wait to open your PowerPoint until you have an idea of your storyline. Mm-hmm. So I do think going into Microsoft Word or whatever document you type in is better to think through what your key messages are. That's really good time management. What I often think though is, why do we do the alternative? Why do we just fire up PowerPoint and start making slides? It feels good. This is false sense of like you're getting something done, when in reality you end up making more and more slides that might not get seen or might not be effective. Where if we spend a little bit of investment upfront thinking about our key messages and then open PowerPoint, which is, by the way, what the top consulting firms in the world do. They storyboard their ideas first. And for those of you that work on teams, I think this is a really important point.
Yes.
So say you're my manager. You come to me and say, Andrew, I'd like you to work on this deck for me. I might not open PowerPoint first, but say, Chris, let's jot down some of the points that you want to make. All of a sudden, if I have clarity from you on the points you want to make in your presentation, the deck I give you back will have those points in them. And then my job is to go in and really find the visual support. And our communication and our working together has fewer back and forths.
Perfect. Great question from Hari.
I love it.
I'm glad that one was asked. You make the case that stories belong in slide decks also. That may be a surprise to some people. How can a business presentation use story effectively?
Sure. Well, first, why stories? Stories capture people's attention and they're more memorable. But when most people hear story, I think they think it's like really personal or dramatic or maybe like a TED Talk. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about story in the form of a narrative structure that guides your audience, either your listener or your reader, through your document, through your deck, that makes them curious about what happens next.
You you have an example.
I do have an example. Yeah,
okay, sorry.
Yeah, so first let me walk you through the structure and then I'll show you some slide examples.
Yes.
So the structure is called situation, complication, resolution.
Okay.
And this is from Barbara Minto. She worked for McKinsey, and I've adapted it from her work. So the situation is simple. What's going on now? How are things? What's the current state? Then at some point you introduce the complication. What's the problem? What's the issue? What's the opportunity? The complication need not always be something bad, could be an opportunity. It really just shows what's changed. What's often most interesting is change. So this is how things were, this is how things are now. And then once we introduce the complication, we want to introduce the resolution. What's the insight, the conclusion, the recommendation that will move this thing forward? So situation, complication, resolution. Now bear with me as I walk you through 3 different ways we might use that framework in a presentation, and then I'll show you one example.
Perfect.
So the first way we might do this is we might let it guide the overall structure of our presentation. We may have a section on the situation where we have multiple slides that walk through what the situation is. Then we have a second section on the complication, multiple slides, perhaps talking through the complication. And then a third section that has a resolution where we walk through what the ideas are for this resolution. That's what I would call to guide the macro structure of a presentation. A second way we could use this framework is we could use it within one section of a presentation. We could have a slide on the situation, a slide on the complication, and a slide on the resolution. And then finally, the third way we might use this framework is all just on one slide. You could imagine having a heading that talks about the situation, and then you unpack the complication, and then you talk about the resolution all on one slide. So 3 different ways. And by the way, this is just one tool in our toolbox for telling stories in a deck. There's lots of different ways we could structure a presentation. This just happens to be a nice, simple, repeatable way. And what I thought I could do is then show you I walk you through an example. So let's do that now with the visuals that I've prepared for today. This slide is an example of a situation slide. We've made this up just for the sake of today. Customer satisfaction has been strong for the past 2 years. We've got a point, and then we see some data here, 4.5 out of 5 stars. So I've established a situation. It's kind of past looking though. Past 2 years, this is where we've been. Now I introduce the complication and say over the last 2 quarters, scores have dropped slightly. You see our score in Q3 went down to a 3.4 out of 5 points. Now, if you were my manager in this situation, you're probably wondering, well, why did that happen? And more importantly, what can we do about it? So in my next slide, I say by retaining our service team or retraining our service team, we can reverse the trend by the end of the 4th quarter. And we can see my projected data on how retraining hopefully will have this positive impact on our customer satisfaction scores. So that's the SCR framework across 3 slides.
One can imagine all kinds of things to do with that particular structure or
Yes.
framework, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If someone listening or in our audience today were to want to make their slides instantly better, not so crazy about hacks, but there are some pretty hot fixes that you can bring to a deck right away. What would you recommend?
The number one thing you can do to improve the clarity of your communication on a slide is pay attention to the heading area. The heading area is in the top left corner. That's where people's eye looks first. And the problem most people do is they tend to put a topic in that space. And the topic doesn't tell people what to think. It just gives them an idea of what the slide's about. So instead of using a topic, I would encourage people to use what I call a headline or a message heading. They should make a claim or include an assertion right at the top of the slide. I call this the bottom line upfront approach for slide communication. So if you think about bottom line upfront, we also call this bluff. Is oftentimes when we do like a math problem, remember in 3rd grade, your teacher said like, show me your math? And that's all the math, and then the answer was at the bottom. In the business world, People don't necessarily want to know all your math, right? They want to know the answer. So surface that answer, bottom line up front at the top of the slide in the heading, and then use the rest of the slide to support the point. That's the best thing we can do. We can convert topic headings to message headings. And I've got an example for that too.
Perfect. Fire it up.
So here's an example of a slide that has a topic heading on it. In this slide, you'll see it says customer satisfaction. Now, there's probably not a lot of conclusions that you would draw from this slide. It seems like a pretty simple enough visual. But imagine if you then want this slide to be looked at after when you're not there, or looked at in advance. People don't know what the point was on this slide. They just know what it was about. They could draw their own conclusions, particularly as data becomes more complex. But on this next slide, I convert the topic heading to a headline. Customer satisfaction improved each month in Q4. There's no question about what the conclusion or the insight is on this slide, during my presentation or after it. What I like to say is that the headline gives your audience the lens through which they will look at your slide. They could choose to look at it a different way, but most audiences will give you the benefit of the doubt and look at it the way you're telling them to look at it.
So we've got the headline dialed in. What would be the next step? Then what can you do to make it?
The next step is, once you've made this clear point, I like to think about the rest of the slide area as being like the body of a paragraph. If we think of the headline as the topic sentence, what else do we do? The problem is, PowerPoint, what does it default to? Bullet points. So we end up just throwing in a whole lot of text. Again, one of the reasons why people have fair complaints about PowerPoint. Instead, I want to encourage everyone to take a visual first approach. I want us to ask, what's the most simple way I can visually support the idea? There's an effect called picture superiority effect. And this suggests that we process visuals faster than we process text, and we're more likely to remember the visuals. So we have a whole variety of visuals tools in our toolbox. We can show pictures. We can show data like I've been doing in the examples. We could show maps, timelines, diagrams, tables. And then once we think about the visual first, then we should be asking ourselves, again, remember this is beyond the headline, what additional text, if any, do I need to support my point? If I'm presenting to you live, I don't think I need any additional text. Just let the visual be there to support, and the text is the words that I say. It shouldn't be on the screen. Medium density, I might have some keywords and phrases to support the point. Maybe that helps me too if I need to be reminded of what my main points are. And then in a high density deck, chances are I might even have sentences or short paragraphs, because again, then in that situation, it'd need to stand alone. So visual first, and then limited amount of text depending on the situation.
And then how would you recommend that we arrange those, right? We have the headlines, the visuals, maybe some data interspersed in there. What do you recommend?
Yeah. Well, good layout guides the eye. So what I always say to people when I'm coaching them on their slides is, where do you want your audience or reader to look first, second, third? Well, there's typical patterns that people read. You might think of a Z formation or an N formation. But this is one of the issues, is that so many ways can go wrong here. One graphic designer found that there's 892 different ways that you can partition this space on a slide, that you can break up this grid. That can be really overwhelming for people, 892 different layouts. The good news is, almost all slides, and I've studied this with one of my graduate students, Roberto, we found that almost like half the slides in our sample used one of 3 layouts. And I'd venture to say for most of us here today, we could do 90% of our slides in these 3 layouts. So let's go back to my slides. I've got a very simple graphic mocked up that I can show you. So here, one of 3 very basic layouts. You could have the visual take up the whole slide. You could split it in half, or you could split it into thirds. Very simple. Now there's some variations that we can work off of this. So I've got one more example to show you from this. So the half layout, you could split in another half and call it the fourths layout. I'd be careful with the fourth layout if I'm using too much text. But if that was 4 pictures, that might be okay for a live presentation. But if I'm using 4 boxes like that, probably better for a higher density deck. And then for the thirds layout, we can see instead of just 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, we could break it into 2/3, 1/3. In my mind, I see a chart in the big 2/3 and some supporting text in the 1/3. If people really just have their base template here, that's going to cover almost all the slides that they have to create.
There's been some chatter among among Dee and others within the chat here who are asking about the thing that I think you think they're asking about. So there's 2 parts to this question.
Sure.
Dee asks, I'm wondering if there's a way to use AI to analyze slides I've created to see if I can make improvements.
Yeah.
And then I want you to talk about the resource that we're going to make available to our audience today.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, AI can be helpful with that. You can upload your deck and ask for feedback. I would be careful because when you ask AI to do a big task at once, it ends up not doing it very well. So the better question to ask might be, here's one slide that I've created, and maybe you know the layout's a little tricky. Asking for feedback on one slide is likely to give you better feedback. But it is the question of the day all the time, right? I actually have 2 eCornell courses coming out this year. One just came out on generative AI for writing, and another one will come out soon on generative AI for helping you prepare a presentation. So I talk about this in that class, which is, I have only like a short video on this, which is AI in general isn't really that great at building slides yet. There are a lot of people trying to sell lots of services that say we can make beautiful slides for you. And I find that they might be great if, I have a daughter who's in middle school. If she used some of these tools to make her middle school book report, I'm sure her middle school teacher, who happens to be my wife, we homeschool, would think it's really impressive.
Yeah, sure.
But these aren't the kind of presentation, the tools aren't really ready for prime time in boardrooms yet. So one of the links that I think we should put in the chat is to my blog post, which is my argument about why AI isn't quite ready to be building your slides yet. I will say that in my book, though, in every chapter, I have a prompt about how you could take the main concept from the chapter, and I call it Try It with AI. So I give an example prompt, and notice I'm not saying, make me a deck. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there which is just like, look, it'll build your presentation in 5 minutes. And it ends up creating something just really terrible. So the tools aren't there yet. I think they'll catch up. I think there'll be a point where they can really be a lot more helpful than they are today. I still think the fundamental principles of understanding what your message is and what you want to communicate will help you more effectively guide AI to help you do what it should do.
Perfect. Good. Well, thank you, Dee, and others for that question. I should mention that, yes, we're going to share the URL for that blog post. Also, Andrew's monthly newsletter offers free resources to workplace communication. I got to be honest, I get a lot of ideas for keynotes from you.
Yeah.
That's kind of how these kind of evolve, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I say, wow, I love this. I love this post. Let's do something with it. And here we are today.
Yeah.
So I want to thank our audience for joining us. And let's make sure that some of these resources are shared. Again, congratulations on the publication of your book.
Thank you.
Tough work. You did it in a year. So there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Audience, viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. We've got plenty of resources for you. We appreciate your questions and your engagement. Hope you get something out of this. Remember that the recording will be available just moments after this at the same URL. So thank you so much, and thank you for watching Cornell Keynotes.